Hello, friends. For our discussion board this week, I chose to analyze the chapter The Curse of Cowardice from James P. Byrd's work, Christianity and the American Revolution. This chapter emphasizes the importance of the Sunday sermon in motivating American patriots to arms. In this chapter, Byrd quotes the famous New England preacher Nathan Perkins, who said, quote, "The most of you are strangers to the dreadful horrors of battle, the roaring of cannon, the smoke and confusion, the cries of the wounded, and the groans of the dying. Even so, be courageous." Now, you can imagine, your pastor preaching a message like this today would seem very much so out of place in our modern world. And it might even seem contrary to the directives of scriptures. For example, Paul writes in Romans 13, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment." According to Emery Elliott in The Dove and the Serpent, sermons both served a religious and political purpose. And according to Elliott, none other than Thomas Jefferson understood this. At one point, Jefferson even calls for a day of fasting and humiliation. Political leaders such as Jefferson understood that if they could tap into the Puritan spirit of the Sunday sermon, then they could disseminate a pro-liberty message faster and perhaps more effectively than a newspaper column or any other medium of the day. Now, the historically astute observer might note that Jefferson was a Virginian. He was a Southern man. He is not from the Puritan Congregationalist stock of New England, and honestly, they would probably reject many of Jefferson's religious ideas anyway. But this is also an important note because the religious fervor for liberty was not just concentrated in Puritan New England, but also had a spirit in the southern states. In his article, The Presbyterian Clergy in South Carolina in the American Revolution, Duard T. Stokes argues that Presbyterian churches in the frontier of the Carolinas helped to spread the pro-liberty message. Interestingly enough, the content of these sermons seems a bit less firebrand than their northern counterparts. And this could be in part because the Presbyterian Church was sort of the minority denomination in the South. The Anglican Church, Stokes mentions, or the Church of England, held a virtual monopoly in southern urban centers, forcing Presbyterians to expand westward into the frontier. And this also forced the Presbyterians to moderate the messages spoken from the pulpit. An example of this moderate tone comes from Stokes' description of a sermon delivered by Reverend Joseph Alexander, about which he says, quote, "The colonial government could not have pointed an accusing finger at any statement in Alexander's sermons, but the double meaning seems clear long after they were composed." So on the surface, the sermons from Alexander seem benign, but it's quite obvious in retrospect that he was supporting the revolutionary government. Despite being forced to temper their message, the Presbyterians fulfilled an important role for the patriot cause in the South. So in conclusion, the Sunday sermon was an essential way to get the pro-liberty message out. And it was not simply concentrated in one part of the colonies or the other, but had a presence everywhere. My name is Russ Rolls, and thank you so much for watching.